Hey there. Welcome to After Dark Horrors. I'm here to help you relax tonight. Though, before you get too cozy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It really makes us feel like the global community it is. I hope you'll give this video a chance because I truly believe you won't find stories quite like these anywhere else. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's begin our evening together. The mist hung heavy between the ancient stone tombs, creating an otherworldly veil that seemed to move with purpose rather than wind. I've always been fascinated by old cemeteries, particularly those with elaborate mausoleums that tell stories of lives long past. What I didn't expect was to collect 5 stories that would make me question everything. I thought I knew about the places where we lay our dead to rest. These aren't just tales of bumps in the night or fleeting shadows. These are accounts from real people who encountered something genuinely unsettling within the walls of these stone monuments to mortality. Each story comes from a different location, a different person, but they all share one common thread: the undeniable feeling that some places hold more than just memories of the departed. Let me take you through these experiences, each one more chilling than the last, and you can decide for yourself what might be lurking in the shadows of these sacred spaces. Our first story comes from Marcus, a cemetery groundskeeper who spent nearly 2 decades maintaining one of New England's oldest burial grounds. The Riverside Memorial Cemetery, established in 1847, sits on a hill overlooking a winding river valley. Its most impressive feature is a collection of ornate mausoleums built by wealthy families during the late 1800s. Marcus had always prided himself on being practical, never one to believe in supernatural nonsense. His job required him to work alone most evenings, securing the grounds and performing maintenance tasks that couldn't be done during visiting hours. The solitude never bothered him until he started noticing odd things around the Whitmore family mausoleum. The Whitmore tomb was one of the grandest structures in the cemetery, built from imported granite with intricate carvings depicting angels and biblical scenes. It housed 3 generations of the family dating back to 1889. What caught Marcus's attention wasn't the elaborate architecture, but the fact that the heavy bronze door would sometimes be found slightly ajar during his evening rounds. The first time he noticed it, Marcus assumed visiting family members had accidentally left it unlatched. He checked the door carefully, ensuring it was properly sealed, and made a note to speak with the cemetery office about reminding visitors to secure mausoleum doors. But 3 days later, during his usual patrol around sunset, he found the door open again. This time, Marcus decided to investigate more thoroughly. He examined the latch mechanism and found it to be in perfect working order. The door was heavy enough that wind couldn't possibly push it open, and there were no signs of tampering or forced entry. He closed it firmly, double-checking that it was secure, and continued his rounds. Over the following weeks, the pattern repeated itself with disturbing regularity. Every few days, Marcus would find the Whitmore mausoleum door standing open, never fully ajar but always just enough to create a dark gap that seemed to beckon from within. He began checking it specifically during each patrol, sometimes finding it closed, other times discovering it open. One evening in late October, as autumn shadows grew longer and colder, Marcus approached the mausoleum to find not only the door open, but a faint light emanating from within. His practical mind immediately jumped to logical explanations. Perhaps someone had broken in, or maybe vandals were using the space inappropriately. He grabbed his flashlight and called out as he approached. No response came from inside, but the light continued to flicker with an odd, unsteady rhythm. Marcus reached the doorway and peered inside, his flashlight beam cutting through the interior darkness. What he saw made him step back instinctively. The light wasn't coming from any artificial source he could identify. Instead, it seemed to emanate from the marble walls themselves, creating a soft, phosphorescent glow that pulsed gently like a slow heartbeat. The interior of the mausoleum, which he'd glimpsed during maintenance visits, appeared somehow different, longer, with shadows that seemed to move independently of his flashlight beam. As Marcus stood there, trying to process what he was seeing, he heard something that made his blood run cold. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoing from somewhere deep within the mausoleum. The sound was unmistakably that of someone walking on stone, but the mausoleum was only about 12 feet deep. There was nowhere for anyone to be walking that would create such extended echoing. Every instinct told him to leave, but his sense of responsibility as groundskeeper compelled him to investigate further. Marcus stepped cautiously across the threshold, his flashlight beam sweeping back and forth. The strange glow seemed to retreat before his artificial light, always staying just at the edge of visibility. The footsteps continued, now seeming to come from multiple directions at once. Marcus called out again, his voice echoing strangely in the confined space, but received no answer except the continuation of those methodical, patient footsteps. As he moved deeper into the mausoleum, he noticed the air growing colder with each step, far colder than the autumn evening outside. Suddenly, the footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was so complete it felt oppressive, broken only by the sound of Marcus's own breathing, which had become rapid and shallow. The phosphorescent glow began to intensify, and Marcus realized he could see details of the mausoleum's interior that shouldn't have been visible in the darkness. Carved into the walls were names and dates he'd never noticed before, some appearing fresh as if recently chiseled, while others seemed ancient beyond the mausoleum's actual age. The dates didn't make sense. Some were from the future, others from centuries past. As Marcus tried to focus on reading them more clearly, the inscriptions seemed to shift and change before his eyes. That was when he heard the voice. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just a simple whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You shouldn't be here," it said, not threatening, but rather concerned, as if warning him of some danger he couldn't perceive. Marcus didn't need to be told twice. He backed toward the entrance, keeping his flashlight trained on the interior, watching as the strange glow faded with each step he took toward the outside world. When he reached the threshold, he turned and walked quickly away, not quite running, but moving with obvious purpose toward his maintenance shed. The next morning, Marcus approached his supervisor about the Whitmore Mausoleum, carefully explaining the recurring problem with the door and his concerns about security. What he didn't mention were the stranger aspects of his experience: the light, the footsteps, the voice. Instead, he focused on practical solutions, suggesting they install a better locking mechanism or perhaps security cameras in that section of the cemetery. His supervisor listened patiently and agreed to look into upgrading the door hardware. However, when they went to examine the mausoleum together that afternoon, they found the door not only closed but locked with a mechanism Marcus had never seen before, an ornate brass lock that looked original to the structure, but which had definitely not been there during any of his previous inspections. From that day forward, Marcus never again found the Whitmore Mausoleum door open. The lock remained in place, and no amount of investigation could determine who had installed it or when. Marcus completed his remaining years at Riverside Memorial without further incident at that particular tomb, but he never again performed his evening rounds without feeling as though unseen eyes were watching from within those stone walls. Our second story takes us to the West Coast, to a historic cemetery in Northern California, where a photographer named Elena encountered something that changed her perspective on both her art and the nature of reality itself. Elena specialized in architectural photography, with a particular interest in historical structures and their artistic details. She had received a commission to photograph several notable mausoleums in Mountain View Cemetery for a book about American funeral architecture. The project excited her because it combined her technical skills with her fascination for the craftsmanship of bygone eras. She had planned to spend an entire day at the cemetery, capturing images during different lighting conditions to showcase the architectural details at their best. Her first few hours went smoothly, producing beautiful shots of elaborate stonework, intricate metalwork, and the interplay of light and shadow across carved surfaces. It was around mid-afternoon when Elena arrived at what would be her final subject of the day, the Thornfield family mausoleum, built in 1901. The structure was magnificent, featuring Gothic Revival architecture with detailed stone tracery and stained glass windows that cast colorful patterns on the interior floor. What made it particularly interesting for her purposes was the way afternoon light filtered through the decorative windows, creating natural spotlights that highlighted different architectural elements throughout the day. Elena set up her equipment outside first, capturing the exterior from various angles as the light shifted. As the afternoon progressed toward early evening, she decided to ask the cemetery office if she might be permitted to photograph the interior. The caretaker was accommodating, explaining that the Thornfield Mausoleum was actually left unlocked during daylight hours because family members still visited regularly, and they preferred not to deal with key arrangements. Armed with this permission and her camera equipment, Elena approached the mausoleum's entrance. The heavy wooden door, fitted with decorative iron hardware, opened smoothly at her touch. Inside, the space was larger than most mausoleums she'd seen, with a central aisle leading to an altar-like structure at the far end. Stone crypts lined both walls, each marked with brass plaques bearing names and dates. The stained glass windows were even more beautiful from inside, casting jeweled light patterns that shifted slowly across the stone surfaces as the sun moved toward the horizon. Elena spent nearly an hour inside, carefully positioning her tripod and adjusting her camera settings to capture the interplay of colored light and shadow. As she worked, Elena became absorbed in the technical aspects of her photography, adjusting exposures and experimenting with different angles. The interior of the mausoleum was peaceful, almost meditative, and she found herself moving more slowly and quietly than usual, partly out of respect for the sacred space and partly because the atmosphere seemed to encourage contemplation. It was while she was changing lenses that Elena first noticed something odd in her camera's LCD screen. She had been reviewing her most recent shots when she spotted what appeared to be a figure in the background of one image. At first, she assumed it was a play of light and shadow that had created a human-like silhouette, something that happened occasionally in architectural photography. But as Elena examined the image more closely, zooming in on the LCD display, she realized the figure appeared to be wearing period clothing from perhaps the early 1900s. More unsettling was the fact that the figure seemed to be looking directly at the camera, as if posing for the photograph. Elena was certain she had been alone in the mausoleum when she took the shot. She lowered her camera and looked around the interior space carefully. She was definitely alone. The late afternoon light streaming through the stained glass windows illuminated every corner clearly enough that no one could be hiding anywhere inside. Elena raised her camera again and took another shot of the same area, then immediately reviewed it on the LCD screen. The figure was still there, but had moved. It now appeared to be standing in a different position, closer to where Elena herself was standing. The image quality was sharp enough that she could make out details of the figure's clothing. A dark suit that looked distinctly Edwardian in style, and what appeared to be a pocket watch chain across the vest. Elena felt her heart rate increase as she realized what was happening wasn't explainable by any photographic effect she knew. She had been taking digital photographs, not film, so there was no possibility of double exposure or other developing anomalies. The images were being captured in real time, showing something that her eyes couldn't see, but her camera somehow could. Despite her growing unease, Elena's professional curiosity overcame her fear. She decided to continue shooting, treating this unexpected development as a unique photographic opportunity rather than something to flee from. She moved to different positions within the mausoleum, taking shots from various angles, always checking the LCD screen immediately after each exposure. The figure appeared in most of the images, always seeming to observe Elena's movements with what appeared to be gentle curiosity rather than malevolence. In some shots, the figure appeared translucent, like a classic ghost photograph. In others, it looked as solid and real as Elena herself. Occasionally, the figure would be missing entirely from an image, only to reappear in the next shot, taken from the same position moments later. As the sun began to set, the stained glass windows cast longer, deeper colored shadows across the mausoleum's interior. Elena noticed that the figure in her photograph seemed to become more distinct and solid-looking as the natural light faded. What had started as a faint, barely perceptible presence was gradually becoming clearer and more detailed with each passing minute. In one particularly clear image, Elena was able to make out the figure's face. It was a man who appeared to be in his 40s or 50s with kind eyes and a gentle expression. He had a mustache styled in the fashion of the early 1900s, and his hair was parted precisely down the middle. Everything about him suggested the era in which the Thornfield Mausoleum had been built. Elena lowered her camera and spoke aloud, feeling somewhat foolish, but compelled to acknowledge what was happening. "I'm sorry if I'm disturbing you," she said quietly. "I'm just here to photograph the architecture. I mean, no disrespect." She raised her camera and took another shot. When she reviewed it on the LCD screen, she felt a chill run down her spine. The figure appeared to be smiling slightly and had raised one hand in what looked unmistakably like a friendly wave. Elena continued photographing for another few minutes as darkness fell outside the mausoleum. Her final shots, taken as the last of the natural light faded from the stained glass windows, showed the figure more clearly than any of the earlier images. In the very last photograph she took, the figure appeared to be tipping his hat in a courteous farewell gesture. When Elena finally packed up her equipment and left the mausoleum, she felt as though she had been part of something remarkable rather than frightening. The experience had been surreal but somehow peaceful, as if she had been granted permission to document not just the architecture, but also something of the lives that the structure was built to commemorate. Later that evening, Elena uploaded her photos to her computer and examined them on a larger screen. The images of the figure were even clearer and more detailed than they had appeared on her camera's LCD display. She had captured what appeared to be genuine photographic evidence of something beyond normal perception. But rather than feeling excited about a potential paranormal discovery, she felt a responsibility to treat the images with respect. Elena ultimately decided not to include the photographs showing the figure in her commercial work for the architecture book. Instead, she printed one of the clearest images for herself and kept it as a private reminder of an extraordinary experience. To this day, she considers her afternoon in the Thornfield Mausoleum to be one of the most meaningful encounters of her career, not because of its supernatural aspect, but because it reminded her that even in places dedicated to memory and loss, there can still be moments of connection and communication that transcend our understanding of reality. Our third story comes from Dr. James Morrison, a historian who specializes in genealogical research and frequently visits cemeteries as part of his work tracing family histories. His experience occurred at Graceland Cemetery in Chicago, one of the most prestigious burial grounds in the Midwest, known for its impressive collection of mausoleums designed by famous architects. James had been researching the Kellerman family history for a client whose ancestors had immigrated to Chicago in the 1880s and built a successful manufacturing business. The family's patriarch, Heinrich Kellerman, had commissioned a mausoleum from the renowned architectural firm of Burnham and Root in 1894, and James needed to photograph the structure and verify the inscription details for his research. He arrived at Graceland Cemetery on a cold February morning, equipped with his research materials and a digital camera for documentation. The Kellerman Mausoleum was located in one of the older sections of the cemetery, surrounded by mature trees that, even bare of leaves, created an intimate, enclosed feeling around the structure. The mausoleum itself was a masterpiece of Gothic Revival architecture, featuring pointed arches, intricate stone tracery, and gargoyle-like figures carved into the corners of the roofline. Heavy bronze doors, green with patina, or the family name in elaborate lettering. James spent several minutes photographing the exterior and making notes about the architectural details and visible inscriptions. As he worked, James noticed that the morning fog, which had been present when he arrived, seemed to linger around this particular mausoleum even as it cleared from other parts of the cemetery. The effect created an atmospheric backdrop for his photographs, but he also found it slightly odd since the mausoleum wasn't located in a particularly low-lying or sheltered area where moisture would naturally collect. After completing his exterior documentation, James walked around the structure looking for any additional inscriptions or architectural details he might have missed. It was during this circuit that he noticed something unusual about one of the bronze door panels. While most of the surface bore the expected patina of age and weather exposure, one small section appeared to be polished bright, as if someone regularly cleaned that particular spot. James examined the polished area more closely and realized it was located at about shoulder height on the right door panel, precisely where someone would naturally place their hand while opening the door. The bright bronze stood out starkly against the surrounding green patina, suggesting recent and repeated contact. This observation puzzled James because his research indicated that the Kellerman family line had ended in the 1960s, with the death of Heinrich's last surviving grandchild. According to cemetery records, no living descendants had claim to the mausoleum, and it had been sealed for decades. The presence of what appeared to be recent maintenance or handling didn't align with this information. James decided to contact the cemetery office to inquire about access to the mausoleum's interior. His client had expressed interest in seeing any family artifacts or additional inscriptions that might be housed inside, and James thought it would be worth investigating if access could be arranged. The cemetery administrator was helpful, but confirmed James's research findings. The Kellerman Mausoleum had indeed been sealed since the 1960s, and the cemetery had no record of any family members or authorized parties requesting access in recent years. However, the administrator mentioned that they occasionally had issues with the doors of older mausoleums settling or shifting due to ground movement, sometimes causing them to appear loose even when properly secured. Armed with this explanation for the polished door area, James returned to the mausoleum to complete his documentation. But as he approached the structure, he noticed something that made him stop in his tracks. The heavy bronze doors, which had been firmly closed during his earlier visit, now stood slightly ajar. James's first thought was that a cemetery worker might have opened the mausoleum for some maintenance reason during the time he had been at the office. However, he had seen no other personnel in this section of the cemetery, and the administrator had made no mention of any scheduled work on the Kellerman tomb. Standing before the partially opened doors, James faced a decision. As a researcher, he was curious to see the interior and gather any additional information that might be relevant to his client's family history. On the other hand, he had no explicit permission to enter the structure, and he wasn't sure if the opening was authorized or accidental. After a moment of consideration, James decided to look inside without actually entering. He approached the doors and peered through the opening, using his camera's flash to illuminate the interior space. What he saw was a beautifully preserved chamber with marble walls, stained glass windows, and several ornate stone sarcophagi arranged in a symmetrical pattern. But what captured James's attention wasn't the architecture or the burial chambers. It was the fact that the interior appeared to be meticulously maintained. The marble surfaces gleamed as if recently cleaned. There was no dust or debris on any surfaces, and fresh flowers, white lilies, had been arranged in vases near several of the sarcophagi. This discovery completely contradicted everything James had been told about the mausoleum being sealed and abandoned. Someone was clearly maintaining the interior space, and recently enough that the flowers still looked fresh. James took several photographs of the interior through the doorway, documenting both the architecture and the evidence of recent maintenance. As he was adjusting his camera settings for a final shot, James heard something that made him freeze. From somewhere deep within the mausoleum came the soft sound of humming, a gentle, melodic tune that echoed off the marble walls. The voice was unmistakably that of a woman, and the melody sounded like an old hymn or lullaby from many decades past. James listened intently, trying to determine where the sound was coming from. The humming continued for several minutes, sometimes growing fainter, as if the person was moving deeper into the mausoleum, other times becoming clearer, as if they were approaching the entrance area. Throughout it all, James could see no movement within the space visible through the doorway. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, but also deeply melancholy, carrying an emotional weight that seemed to transform the atmosphere around the mausoleum. The lingering fog seemed to thicken, and the February cold felt more penetrating. James found himself deeply moved by the sound, even as it puzzled and unsettled him. After several minutes, the humming faded away, leaving only the quiet sounds of winter wind through bare tree branches. James waited another few moments, then called out softly, "Hello? Is someone there?" His voice echoed briefly within the mausoleum, but no response came back except for the gradual settling of silence. James spent another hour at the Kellerman Mausoleum, but neither the humming nor any other unusual sounds returned. The doors remained ajar, and the interior continued to show signs of careful maintenance, but no explanation presented itself for either the mysterious caretaking or the beautiful, melancholy melody he had heard. When James returned to the cemetery office to report his observations, the administrator was genuinely puzzled by his account. Records showed no authorized access to the Kellerman Mausoleum, no contracted maintenance services, and certainly no budget for fresh flowers or cleaning supplies. The administrator promised to investigate the matter further and thanked James for bringing it to his attention. Several days later, James received a call from the cemetery administrator with surprising news. A security review had revealed that motion sensors near the Kellerman Mausoleum had been triggered periodically over the past several months, always during early morning hours and always lasting for exactly the same duration, about 45 minutes. However, security camera footage from those times showed no human activity in the area. Even more intriguing, the administrator had spoken with the cemetery's longest-serving groundskeeper, who remembered stories told by his predecessor about the Kellerman Mausoleum. According to those stories, Heinrich Kellerman's wife, Margaret, had been known throughout her lifetime for her beautiful singing voice and her habit of spending hours at the gravesite of her deceased children, humming lullabies and placing fresh flowers on their markers. James completed his research project for his client, but the Kellerman Mausoleum remained one of his most memorable and mysterious encounters. He often wondered about the identity of the unseen caretaker and whether Margaret Kellerman might still be tending to her family's resting place in ways that transcend our normal understanding of life and death. Our fourth story takes us to the south, to a cemetery in Savannah, Georgia, where a night security guard named David encountered something that made him reconsider his lifelong skepticism about the supernatural. David had worked security for over 15 years, mostly at office buildings and retail complexes. But when a position opened up at Bonaventure Cemetery, he decided the change of pace might be interesting. Bonaventure was one of Savannah's most famous cemeteries, known for its dramatic Spanish moss-draped trees, elaborate Victorian monuments, and its appearance in the novel and film Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. The job seemed straightforward. Patrol the grounds during overnight hours, ensure no vandalism or trespassing occurred, and maintain the security of the various monuments and mausoleums. David appreciated the quiet nature of the work and found the cemetery's natural beauty impressive, even in darkness. For his first several weeks on the job, David established a routine that took him through all sections of the cemetery in a logical pattern. He carried a flashlight and radio, checked in with the security company dispatcher at regular intervals, and kept detailed logs of his observations. The work was peaceful and uneventful, exactly what he had hoped for after years of dealing with more chaotic security situations. The mausoleum that would change David's perspective on his new job was located in one of the older sections of the cemetery, surrounded by ancient live oak trees whose massive branches formed a natural canopy, even in winter. The Beauregard family mausoleum dated to 1887 and was built in the classical revival style with white marble columns and a triangular pediment, featuring carved angels. David first noticed something unusual about the Beauregard mausoleum during his third week on the job. As he made his rounds around midnight, his flashlight beam caught what appeared to be candlelight flickering inside the structure. The mausoleum had stained glass windows on either side of the entrance, and a warm, golden glow was clearly visible through the colored glass. David's training told him this could indicate unauthorized entry or possibly vandalism in progress. He approached cautiously, radio in hand, and examined the entrance doors. They appeared to be securely locked, with no signs of tampering or forced entry. The candlelight continued to flicker gently through the stained glass windows, creating beautiful patterns of colored light that danced across the marble surfaces. David circled the entire mausoleum, checking for any other possible entry points or signs of disturbance. Everything appeared normal except for the unexplained light source inside. He tried shining his flashlight through the stained glass windows, but the beam wasn't strong enough to illuminate the interior clearly enough to determine what was causing the glow. After considering his options, David decided to radio for assistance from his supervisor. However, when he tried to reach the dispatcher, his radio produced only static. This was unusual because he had been in regular contact throughout the evening and had experienced no communication problems. David moved away from the mausoleum and tried his radio again. It worked perfectly. Returning to the mausoleum, David found that his radio again produced only static when he was within about 20 feet of the structure. The candlelight continued to flicker inside, and David made a decision to document what he was observing rather than trying to investigate further without backup communication. He retreated to a position where his radio worked and called in a report to his supervisor, describing the light inside the mausoleum and his inability to determine its source. His supervisor listened to the report and told David to continue monitoring the situation, but not to attempt entry without additional personnel present. David returned to the Beauregard Mausoleum and settled in to observe from a safe distance. The candlelight remained steady for another hour, then gradually began to dim. As David watched, the glow faded slowly until it disappeared completely, leaving the mausoleum dark and ordinary-looking once again. The next evening, David made sure to check the Beauregard Mausoleum early in his patrol routine. It appeared normal, with no signs of disturbance or unusual activity. His radio worked properly in the area, and his flashlight revealed nothing unusual about the interior through the stained glass windows. David began to wonder if he had somehow misinterpreted what he had seen the previous night. But 3 nights later, the mysterious candlelight appeared again. This time, David was prepared with a camera to document the phenomenon. The photographs clearly showed the warm glow emanating from inside the mausoleum, though they couldn't capture the gentle flickering quality that made the light so distinctive to the naked eye. Over the following weeks, David established that the candlelight appeared approximately every 3 to 4 days, always around midnight, and always lasted between 1 and 2 hours before gradually fading away. The pattern was consistent enough that David could predict when the phenomenon was likely to occur. During one of these episodes, David noticed something that added a new dimension to the mystery. As he watched the stained glass windows, he began to see shadows moving inside the mausoleum, silhouettes that appeared to be people moving slowly around the interior space. The shadows were clear enough that David could tell they represented more than one figure, and their movements seemed purposeful rather than random. The shadows appeared to be engaged in some kind of gathering or ceremony. They would congregate in one area of the mausoleum for a while, then move in what looked like a procession to another area. Sometimes the shadows would pause in positions that suggested they were kneeling or bowing their heads, as if in prayer or contemplation. David watched these shadow gatherings several times over the next month, always from a respectful distance, and always with the same sense of witnessing something sacred and private. The figures never seemed to notice his presence, and their activities appeared to follow a consistent ritual pattern each time the candlelight appeared. One evening in late spring, David arrived for his shift to find a note from the day supervisor informing him that the cemetery had received a special request. A descendant of the Beauregard family living in France had contacted the cemetery about arranging a private memorial service at the family mausoleum. The request was unusual because it involved lighting candles inside the structure and holding a brief ceremony to honor ancestors who had died during the Civil War. When David read the details of the request, he felt a chill of recognition. The planned ceremony was scheduled for the same time of night, when he had been observing the mysterious candlelight, and the description of the memorial ritual matched exactly what he had been seeing in the shadow movements inside the mausoleum. The family descendant, a woman named Claire Beauregard, arrived from France the following week and held her memorial service on a Thursday evening. David was given permission to observe the ceremony from a distance as part of his security duties. What he witnessed that night confirmed his suspicions about the connection between the living memorial and the phenomena he had been observing. Claire conducted her ceremony with solemn dignity, lighting candles and placing flowers while reading names and dates from a family genealogy. Her movements inside the mausoleum cast shadows on the stained glass windows that were identical to what David had been seeing during his mysterious encounters. Even more remarkable, her ritual followed the same pattern and timing as the unexplained ceremonies he had witnessed. After Claire completed her memorial and departed, David expected the mysterious candlelight appearances to cease. Instead, they continued with the same regularity as before. However, David now understood what he was witnessing, some kind of ongoing memorial observance that transcended the boundaries between past and present, continuing even when no living family members were present to conduct it. David completed his contract at Bonaventure Cemetery with a profound respect for the mysteries that exist in places dedicated to memory and remembrance. His experience at the Beauregard Mausoleum convinced him that some locations hold emotional and spiritual energy that manifests in ways our rational minds struggle to comprehend, but which our hearts can recognize as genuine expressions of love, loss, and eternal connection. Our fifth and final story comes from Rebecca, a paranormal investigator who specializes in historical research and has spent years studying unexplained phenomena in locations with significant emotional histories. Her encounter occurred at a mausoleum in Portland, Oregon, where she was conducting research for a documentary about Pacific Northwest ghost stories. The Riverside Cemetery in Portland contains several notable mausoleums dating from the late 1800s and early 1900s, but the structure that drew Rebecca's attention was the Morrison family tomb, built in 1903. The Morrison family had been prominent in Portland's early timber industry, and their mausoleum reflected their wealth and social status with elaborate stonework and beautiful stained glass panels depicting scenes from nature. Rebecca had been drawn to investigate the Morrison Mausoleum because of persistent reports from cemetery visitors about unusual sounds emanating from the structure. Over the past several years, multiple people had reported hearing what sounded like children playing inside the mausoleum, laughter, running footsteps, and the kinds of games children might play in an echoing space. What made these reports particularly intriguing was the fact that several members of the Morrison family had been children when they died. During a diphtheria outbreak in 1905, the family had lost 3 children within a 2-week period, and historical records indicated that their deaths had devastated the parents and fundamentally changed the character of the family's social involvement in Portland society. Rebecca approached her investigation with both scientific methodology and respectful sensitivity to the tragic history involved. She spent considerable time researching the Morrison family, learning about their lives, their business interests, their community involvement, and most importantly, their children who had died so young. The 3 Morrison children, Emma, age 8, Thomas, age 6, and little Sarah, age 4, had been described in contemporary newspaper accounts as lively, intelligent, and beloved, not just by their parents, but by the entire household staff and extended social circle. Their sudden deaths had been a source of citywide mourning, and their funeral had been one of the largest gatherings in Portland's history at that time. Armed with this background information, Rebecca arranged to spend an evening at the cemetery with permission from the administration and accompanied by the night security guard. She brought audio recording equipment, electromagnetic field detectors, and temperature monitoring devices, but she was careful to explain that her primary interest was in documenting and understanding any phenomena rather than sensationalizing or exploiting them. Rebecca and the security guard arrived at the Morrison Mausoleum just after sunset on a clear autumn evening. The structure was beautifully situated beneath mature maple trees whose changing leaves created a natural backdrop of gold and red colors. The mausoleum itself was in excellent condition, with the stained glass panels catching the last rays of sunlight and casting colorful patterns on the surrounding ground. For the first several hours, Rebecca's investigation proceeded quietly. She set up her equipment at various positions around the mausoleum, taking baseline readings and recording ambient sounds. The evening was peaceful, with only the normal sounds of wind through leaves and occasional distant traffic from the city beyond the cemetery grounds. Around 10 o'clock, Rebecca's electromagnetic field detector began registering unusual fluctuations near the entrance to the mausoleum. The readings weren't dramatic, but they showed consistent patterns that suggested some kind of energy activity in the area. At the same time, her digital thermometer indicated temperature drops of several degrees, again in patterns that seemed to move around the structure rather than being caused by weather conditions. As Rebecca was adjusting her equipment to better monitor these anomalies, she heard the first sounds that explained why the Morrison Mausoleum had attracted so much attention. From somewhere inside the structure came the unmistakable sound of children's laughter, not the echoing or distant quality one might expect from sounds carrying from elsewhere in the cemetery, but clear, joyful laughter that seemed to be happening just on the other side of the mausoleum walls. Rebecca immediately activated her audio recording equipment and signaled to the security guard, who had been monitoring the situation from a discreet distance. Both of them could clearly hear what sounded like at least two, possibly three children engaged in some kind of playful activity inside the mausoleum, though. Sounds continued for several minutes, laughter punctuated by what seemed to be running footsteps and the kinds of verbal exchanges children make when playing games together. Rebecca could occasionally make out individual words or phrases, though not clearly enough to understand complete sentences. What was remarkable was the purely joyful quality of the sounds, completely free of any sadness or distress. As Rebecca listened and recorded, she found herself smiling despite the surreal nature of the situation. The children's play sounded so natural and happy that it was impossible to feel frightened or uncomfortable. Instead, she felt as though she was being privileged to witness a moment of pure childhood joy that had somehow transcended the boundaries of time and mortality. After about 15 minutes, the sounds gradually faded, but not in a way that suggested the children had moved away or stopped playing. Instead, it was more like someone slowly turning down the volume on a radio, allowing the sounds to fade into silence while maintaining their essential character right until the end. Rebecca continued her monitoring for several more hours, but no additional phenomena occurred that evening. Her equipment readings returned to normal baseline levels, and the mausoleum returned to the quiet dignity one would expect from such a place. However, Rebecca's audio recordings from that evening provided clear documentation of the children's voices and laughter. When she analyzed the recordings later using audio enhancement software, she was able to identify what appeared to be three distinct voices, two girls and a boy, engaged in what sounded like a hiding and seeking game. Most remarkably, Rebecca was able to enhance the recordings enough to make out several phrases clearly. The voices could be heard calling names. "Emma, where are you?" and "Thomas, come find us." That matched exactly the names of the Morrison children who had died in 1905. Rebecca's investigation of the Morrison Mausoleum became one of her most compelling cases, not because of its dramatic or frightening aspects, but because it seemed to document something genuinely wonderful: the continuation of childhood joy and play in a realm beyond our normal understanding. Rather than being a tale of restless spirits or unfinished business, it appeared to be evidence that some aspects of love and happiness are so pure and strong that they transcend even death itself. When Rebecca later interviewed other people who had reported hearing children's sounds at the Morrison Mausoleum, she found a consistent pattern in their descriptions. Everyone who had experienced the phenomena described feeling uplifted and peaceful rather than frightened. Many said the experience had given them comfort about their own deceased loved ones and a sense that death might not be the absolute ending we sometimes fear it to be. These 5 stories, from different mausoleums across the country, share common threads that speak to something profound about the places we create to honor and remember our dead. Each location served as a bridge between the world of the living and whatever lies beyond. But rather than being sources of fear or dread, they seem to offer evidence of continuing connection, love, and even joy. Whether these experiences represent genuine supernatural phenomena, the power of emotional memory embedded in sacred spaces, or something else entirely, may be less important than what they reveal about our human need to maintain bonds with those we've lost. In each case, the witnesses came away not with terror, but with a deeper appreciation for the mysteries that surround us and the possibility that love truly is stronger than death. The mausoleums in these stories stand as more than just architectural monuments or repositories for human remains. They serve as focal points for the ongoing relationships between the living and the dead, places where the boundaries between past and present, seen and unseen, become permeable enough for moments of genuine connection to occur. Perhaps that's the real message hidden within these stone walls and stained glass windows, that the human capacity for love, memory, and connection doesn't end with death, but finds new ways to express itself in places specifically designed to honor and preserve those precious bonds. The next time you find yourself walking through an old cemetery, pausing before an ornate mausoleum, remember that you may be standing before more than just a monument to the past. You might be in the presence of love that has found a way to transcend time itself. To anyone who stuck with me until the very end, thank you so much for sharing this journey into the unknown. Your company makes these dark stories feel a little less lonely, and I'm truly grateful you chose to spend your evening here with me. I hope these tales have given you exactly what you came for, that delicious blend of fear and fascination. There's something wonderfully here about how we can all gather in the darkness, connected by our love of a good scare. And I genuinely hope tonight's stories resonated with you as much as they did with me. I'll be back tomorrow night with more mysteries and chills waiting to unfold. So, I hope you'll join me again. Until then, sleep well, dream peacefully, and don't let tonight's stories follow you into your dreams. Though, if they do, just remember they're only stories after all. Sweet dreams, my friend. See you tomorrow night.